Transboundary water is pivotal for sustainable development and global water security, serving 2.8 billion people, covering 42% of the Earth's surface and flowing through 153 countries. Enhancing water cooperation over transboundary water will be crucial for a water-secure world. Managers and practitioners of transboundary water are important catalysts to boost this cooperation. They have requested for learning opportunities on how to improve governance aspects of transboundary freshwater security. The course will cover water security, international water law, water diplomacy, institutions, management tools, and financing. The course is dynamic, engaging the world-renowned professionals and international organizations and showcasing many case studies around the world. The course is open for anyone who's interested in the subject to join. We look forward to welcoming you to the course.
Hello, everyone. It is a great pleasure to warmly welcome you to the 13th session of the Transboundary Freshwater Security Governance Train. My name is Yumiko Yasuda. I'm the Senior Transboundary Water Cooperation Specialist at the Global Water Partnership and the lead faculty of the Massive Open Online course on the governance for transboundary freshwater security, which was developed by GWP, GFIWLearn, along with many global partners and experts from the field of transboundary water. Since opening of this course in August 2020, the MOOC has attracted over 3,200 participants from 161 countries around the world, confirming the need and interest of the learning about the subject. The course is available for anyone to take at their own pace, and also it is now translated into French, Chinese, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish. You will be able to utilize this through the subtitle of the video, and French course exists also on the CapNet virtual campus as well. In order to enhance this learning experience and to provide opportunities for people to engage and interact with experts in the field, GWP, together with partners, have developed this online interactive series called Transboundary Freshwater Security Governance Train. In this series of events, we are highlighting not only the key topics of transboundary freshwater governance, but also to highlight the various examples and expertise from different geographic locations around the globe, as if train is stopping at various locations in the world. Today, our train will be stopping at Asia, Africa, and Europe, welcoming speakers from all of these places. Now the MOOC is celebrating its 3rd year of implementation. We started this season 3 of this event series since September. We have 3 events this autumn, and today's session is co-hosted by GWP and IHE Delft on the topic of the role of institutionalized cooperation in shared basins. What's the recipe for effective basin governance? Today's session has 2 main parts. The first part is a panel discussion by distinguished speakers where they will be sharing their experience on the topic and answering the questions. The second part will be the breakout session where you will all have opportunities to interact with experts. We have a great lineup of session chairs and speakers for the next 1.5 hours. And after the event, you will have an opportunity to continue the conversation through Transboundary Water Knowledge Exchange Hub that I will explain to you in a little while. I would like to remind you of some housekeeping rules. This online session will be recorded, so people who could not join due to the other commitments or time zone will be able to also view the discussions. Please always mute your audio when the moderator or speakers are presenting. You can unmute your audio and will be invited to unmute your audio by the moderator or the chair when they request to speak, particularly in the breakout session. This event will not only present the new knowledge, but will also welcome your input in the interactive part. So we count on your presence throughout the whole session. Today's session is designed to be as interactive as possible for you to be able to ask your questions to experts and also to provide your thoughts and feedback to the subject. We'll be using Mentimeter as a main interactive tool, particularly during the first part. Some of you have already used this Mentimeter while waiting for the event to start. So let's now go to this Mentimeter, everyone. And then let's hear from everyone on your answers to some of these ice-breaking questions. So the first question we have is, we want to know where you're joining from. So please go to www.menti.com and then type in the number 62372866. So now we see some dots coming from Europe, Africa, and also we see some dots coming now in China, South Asia, I think, Southeast Asia. It looks like now this could be Central Asia. Yes, I also see somebody from Indonesia, then coming to Latin America as well, South America, Central America, North America, yes, and Mexico. I think, yeah, great to really see so many people joining from all over the world. And I know some of you, it's quite late in the night, and some of you quite early in the morning. And yes, some of our speakers are also joining quite late time of his time zone. So thank you very much. Great to really see all where you're coming from. And I also thank you for giving your answer in the chat. So let's go to the next question. Have you joined Transboundary Water Knowledge Hub? Do you know about it? So let's hear. This is actually a hub that we have opened on our GWP's new toolbox. So I can see many of you have not joined. Okay, some have yet said yes, but now I see most people have not yet joined. Yes, more people are joining. Really great to see that. Okay, thank you very much. So this Transboundary Water Knowledge Hub was actually developed based on the feedback from all of you who have joined the MOOC and who have also participated to these online events. We heard always people are saying that our events are too short. We have 1.5 hour event, but most of the time participants say they want to continue this engagement. So this is why, one of the reasons why I created this Transboundary Water Knowledge Hub, which is a community of transboundary practitioners and also anyone who's interested, students, scholars, anyone from the non-government sector or government sector. It's really based on your request. We also have done a consultation both online and also at the World Water Forum and different parts. So we actually have now launched this hub in June, and then since then quite many of you have been starting to join. So today would be your opportunity to join the hub. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, sorry, can we actually maybe go to the hub slide so I can explain the hub? Thank you very much. So this is the Transboundary Water Knowledge Exchange Hub, which is hosted on the GWP's new toolbox. Some of you may know that GWP has this IWM toolbox that's been there for the past 20 years. And now we actually have revised this to be much more interactive. And one of the features is that we could actually host different communities. And in this community, you have a different threads that you can actually share your event information. You can share your blogs. You can share different materials, opportunities, discussions, and so on. And so it also has some profiles of the members. So you can see here some of the stream on the left coming. The most updated one is coming from Isabella. So we really would like to see many of you joining the hub and also exchange. And then if you go to the next slide. So we will then be, sorry, this slide is, the title is outdated, but actually it's a post-event discussion on today's event on the the river basin organizations, institutions. So there is already a thread for this post-event discussion. So please join there right after the event or anytime after the event to continue the conversation. Apologies for this one. This is actually the last event discussion, and you can see already some of the people are putting some comments in there. Thank you very much. So if the tech host can go back to the mentee on the question. Yes. So what makes transboundary basin governance effective? So today's topic is, of course, on institutions. We'd like to hear from you. So here you already see some answers. The exchange and understanding of more global pictures, institutions, stakeholder information, diplomacy, IWRM expertise, control of shared transboundary water, institutionalized corporations and platforms, competence in the subject, the dialogue, international relations and information sharing, political will, commitments from countries, effective RBOs. Thank you so much for many suggestions and answers from you here. I think many of you have also highlighted the importance of institutions, but also other governance tools for really improving this transboundary water governance. So today's topic will be specifically focusing on one of the aspects, the institutionalized cooperation, but also it touches upon various aspects. So I hope you will really enjoy that conversation. And then if you can go to the next one, please type in any questions you would like to ask the panelists. So the idea of this question is while you're listening to our panel, you can type in your question that you want to ask to the panel. And then if you also agree with other people's question, you can vote for the question. So we will see which ones are all more popular. And during the panel discussion, some of the popular questions will be addressed, or you can also bring these questions to the breakout session. Great, now you already got one question. What are some of the best practices for setting up an RBO? What are the key design features? Hopefully you might have some answers during the presentation, initial presentation from the speakers. But yes, thank you very much. So please keep typing in the questions as you hear from the speakers. Okay, so I would like to now go to our main part of today's event. And I would like to introduce our event chair today, Dr. Susana Schmeyer, who is Associate Professor in Water Law and Diplomacy at IHE Delft. You can go to the next slide. So Susana is, as I said, Associate Professor at IHE Delft, and her research, teaching, and advisory work focuses on conflict and cooperation over shared natural resources and environment, with particular focus on water. She's interested in institutions, how institutions can help prevent or mitigate conflict and what makes institutions effective in doing so. And as many of you may know, he's also the module coordinator on the institutions in our MOOC, the module 4. So hopefully many of you have already listened to her lecture, an introductory lecture on the institution. Before joining IHE, Susana also worked at a GIZ, where she was managing Transboundary portfolio. She has also worked at the World Bank and also the Mekong River Commission and other international organizations. She's holding a PhD in international water governance and diploma in international relations and international law, the LLM international law. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to you, Susana, to give some introductory remark and to give the context. Thank you so much, Susana. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Yumiko, for the very kind introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you today at this event that's being, as Yumiko was saying, co-hosted by GWP and IHE Delft. We'll be focusing today specifically on institutionalized corporations, so basin organizations, and what makes them effective or how they can help managing basins effectively. So you might wonder, why does it matter? Why is it so important to have basin organizations in place in the first place? Well, it starts with the observation that we see around the world that quite often countries are at a certain time willing to cooperate. There might be a commitment to cooperate at a certain point in time, but as you all know, this can change. So a commitment at one point to cooperate might not last if disagreements or conflicts arise in the future. This is why in many of the large basins around the world, countries have actually decided to institutionalize such commitment further by setting up basin treaties, but then also basin organizations. So basin organizations basically help countries to have a permanent platform in place on which they can meet regularly, through which they can exchange data and information, that organize regular meetings, even in times of disagreement, and that help them implement either basin monitoring activities, so just activities that are needed in order to understand the state of the basin's resources and potential change and challenges, or to also implement specific projects that can help improve the state of the basin. And that can be anything from joint water quality improvement measures to water allocation to fishery programs, or whatever else might be important in that basin. And what we know from evidence around the world is that shared basins that have such an institution, that have such a basin organization in place, tend to experience less conflict than the basins that do not have such a mechanism in place. And moreover, if there is disagreement or conflict happening, as it is happening constantly as countries interact, this conflict is much less intense. So basin organizations are really a key tool with the work that they do to ensure that disagreements that might come up between countries, for example, over how to share water, which water quality standards to implement, or how to adapt to climate change, that these disagreements are being dealt with in a cooperative manner, on the basis of predefined mechanisms of coming to joint decisions or solving certain challenges that they address. The question is, however, with these more than 120 basin organizations that exist around the world, are they actually effective? So are they delivering on what they promise? When countries set up basin organizations, the expectation is, of course, that the pure existence of such a basin organization helps to make the basin better, help to manage the basin better, improve the state of the resources, improve the way how countries, but also individual people can benefit from the services that the basin provides, and so on. However, as you probably also all know, there's quite some variation around the world in terms of how basin organizations perform, how effective they've been in addressing certain problems, how effective they've been in implementing certain activities that they agreed to, and so on. And I think here, maybe just a word on effectiveness, I think here the first step for me when we talk about the effectiveness of institutionalized cooperation is for all of us individually to think about what we actually mean by effectiveness. Because quite often you have probably seen in the media, basin organizations are being criticized for not being effective. I know the Mekong River Commission has been called a paper tiger by the press before. But what's our basis for judging that? Are we judging a basin organization for a perfect state of the basin, where resources are managed sustainably, where there's no conflicts, where there's really great socioeconomic development on the basis of the resources? Or aren't we actually then putting a burden on the basin organization that it cannot live up to, right? Obviously, the way how basin is being managed does not only depend on the basin organization. So just maybe as for all of you, as an introductory thought, what would you think is a really effective basin organization? What we want to address in the session today is more the other side, what makes a basin organization effective? And of course, we can think of many, many different elements that determine the effectiveness of basin corporations through basin organizations. And many of you are probably thinking of factors that are somewhat outside of basin organizations. For example, there are big power imbalances between countries. If there's one really powerful state in the basin that does not want to cooperate, that's going to make it very difficult for the RBO to be effective. Or you might be thinking of regions where there's very, very little water available, hence there's quite a bit of disagreement of how to share the water. This is also something that's going to make it difficult for the basin organization to be effective. Not impossible, definitely not, but difficult. But these are all elements or factors of of effectiveness that we find outside of the Basin organization. What I would like to focus on today with you is more something that relates to the design, to the setup, to the functioning of the Basin organization itself, because that's of course also something that we can address through policy measures, right? Changing the power balance in a basin is going to be a bit challenging, but the way how a basin organization functions is something that we can all improve as we work on transboundary water management. And the research that me and other colleagues have done shows that three elements tend to be particularly relevant when it comes to basin organizations being effective. And we want to address all of them today. The first one is the ability of a basin organization to develop and also to implement basin management plans or basin development plans. So the ability of the basin organization to bring together the countries to come up with a joint plan based on what the issues are in the basin, what are the challenges need to be addressed, and then to define how they're being addressed and what the countries want to do together in order to improve the management of the basin. And that's number one. The second element, quite closely related actually, is the linkages to the member states. So Basin Organization is an international organization that brings together the member states. But of course, it also provides something on top of the different elements. So it's not only the sum of the parts, but it's actually more than it. But it will be always important that whatever is being decided, discussed, agreed upon at the basin levels through the basin organization is actually mirrored back and is implemented in the member countries, whereas what the member countries are doing also feeds into what's being done at the basin level. So linkages to member states is a second element that really matters for effectiveness. And the last one that's quite often overlooked is funding. Sounds pretty straightforward, yet is often forgotten in many basins. But you can imagine, in order for a basin organization to do its work, it needs money. It needs money for its mere existence. This is what we call the core funding. So just for the basin organization to exist, to have staff, there's funding needed. But obviously also for implementing projects and activities over time, funding is also needed. And what's important here is also where that funding comes from. Does it come from member states, who therewith also show a commitment to cooperation? Or does it, for example, rely entirely on external, on development partner funding, which can be great to start up an organization, but will be an issue in terms of self-sustainability, in terms of financial security in the long run. So these three elements, ability to manage a basin, linkages to member states, and the funding are the three elements that we would like to discuss with you today. And I'm not going to do that alone, but I am joined by three great panelists. Yes, great, we can see the speaker list, that's great. So we have three people actually all representing basin organizations that are quite known for their work, that have been quite famous in the past, I would say, for the work that they've been doing. We have, first of all, Untitled Chapter. He's the executive secretary of the Orange Senku River Commission, called Orasicom. So here we're finding ourselves in Southern Africa. We are also joined by Birgit Vogel, who is the executive secretary of the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube River, ICPDR, so Southeastern Central Europe. And last but not least, we also have Santi Baran with us, who is the Chief Strategy and Partnership Officer of the Mekong River Commission, the MRC, so also having Southeast Asia on board today. And I'm very happy that all of them will share their insights today, each of them focusing on one specific topic, and later also each of them being in one of the breakout groups that you can join later. So keep in mind who's talking about what, in case you want to join them for more detailed questions later. But for now, with any further ado, I'd like to start with the first brief input, which comes from Tatelenka Tamai, as I said, the executive secretary from Orasicom, someone who's been working on transboundary water resources management in the Southern African region for a really long time, basing all the great work he has done on his degree in water resources engineering that he holds, but also bringing a whole lot of experience from working with SADC, working in the region, and I would say really being one of the people, if you want to know anything about transboundary water resources management in the SADC region, he is the go-to person. So Lenka, with that, I would like to hand over to you and ask you, Entitled Lenka, what's the RASECOM doing in terms of developing and implementing the basin management plan, and how does it help the basin? Over to you.
And thank you very much, and thanks to the organizers for asking us to participate. I think I'll move straight to the next slide, just to depict some of the elements that I believe are important in terms of the work we do. To say that the Orange Sinku or River Commission or RASECOM was established in the year 2000. Some of the main elements of the work that we have been doing have been to try to consolidate among the countries what we can do together. And this crystallized in an integrated water resource management plan, but it took a while. And most of the work that was being undertaken jointly was firstly to establish the institution, secondly, to try to establish a common understanding among the states on the issues and the challenges that have to be dealt with before we went into what we feel are the future scenarios that then informed the type of strategies that we hope to implement. The next slide, please. And very quickly, going through some of the content of the plan that we agreed on, which we felt would be useful, would be in 10-year cycles. We broke it down into three components, where we have central strategic objectives, focusing on sustainable management of the water resource, supporting socioeconomic upliftment, addressing issues to do with degradation of the catchment, and the maybe improved water security, and trying to address any issues to do with disasters. Then we have what we call enabling strategic objectives, which have to do with knowledge management, capacity building, stakeholder engagement, financing, as well as monitoring and evaluation. But we also found it very important, out of the consultations that were held among the various role players, that there are some enabling or cross-cutting strategic objectives which are beyond just water, and these have to do with climate change and the mainstreaming of gender. The next slide, please. So what have we been doing in order to action those plans that we put in place? One can again isolate the actions that we are involved in to try to implement the plan into three categories, where the one category would have to do with environmental sustainability actions, where we are looking at compiling guidelines to do with environment and social assessment, ESIA as it is called, and this bodes very well with the kinds of work that is being handled, especially on infrastructure. Challenges to do with groundwater, salinity are being addressed through experiments or maybe piloting of low-cost groundwater desalination projects, and these are particularly important in Botswana, although this would also apply to Namibia as well. Then we have two more actions on environmental sustainability, one to do with providing for ecological requirements or environmental flow regimes, and the other one to do with water quality or river pollution in the form of a joint basin survey of water resources. One can move on to the joint infrastructure actions that were also identified within the basin plan, which are now being implemented. The big one in this case is the Lesotho-Botswana Water Transfer Project, aiming at harnessing water from Lesotho, supplying some demands in Lesotho and along a conduit in the Republic of South Africa, but delivering a certain amount to the Republic of Botswana. Then there is a dam re-regulation project that is, a flow re-regulation project through a dam, which is along the common boundary between South Africa and Namibia. And then we have some enabling, other emerging areas which are listed there. Important here that one can say within the time available now, is that there is quite significant work being done on the shared aquifer between Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. The next slide, please. But these two slides are really just to position those large infrastructure projects. The next slide, please, that I have spoken about. The next slide, please. And I thank you for now, and I think I'll take up questions much later. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ntatelenka. Really interesting to hear what's happening in Southern Africa, and also interesting to see how you described what had to precede, which activities had to happen first before you came to a management plan. You said not only did you have to consolidate the organization, but of course you also had to define what the key water management issues were in the basin and have the countries agree to that. And I think all that together and then feeding it into a plan is really what needs to be done by a basin organization to then allow for such substantial projects such as the Botswana transfer now to really happen in a cooperative setting with all the basin countries involved. I think that's a really great example, and I'm sure we'll definitely come back to that in a little bit when we have more time for questions for you. For now, I would like to move on to Birgit Vogel. As I said, Birgit is the Executive Secretary of the ICPDR. She's also has put boat riding on her bucket list in the Okavango Delta, which I must claim has been partly due to my influence and my love for the Okavango. Yeah, and I think Birgit has really been instrumental in working in the Danube, but has also shared her knowledge with other basins. Birgit has also worked on basin management in India, has also worked on the Mekong with the MRC. So here we're having someone who represents the ICPDR, but can probably later also bring experience from other basins around the world in the discussion. But let's stick with the Danube for now, Birgit. The Danube Basin is quite a big basin. It's in fact the most international basin around the world, with many, many riparian states, biggest number of member states for any RBO around the world. So can you tell us a little bit more, Birgit, how do you manage the linkages between the ICPDR as the regional organization and then the many member states?
Thank you, Susana. And Tobias, if you could share the slides, you can go to the next one straight away. And of course, I could say a lot about the management in the Danube River Basin, which of course also relates to other basins. But I decided to focus on some key components. Just to recall a little bit, you mentioned already it's the most international basin, but it's also a large basin, 800,000 square kilometers and 19 countries sharing the basin and almost 80 million people. And I think the Danube has done quite a lot of work in transboundary cooperation that we are, of course, always happy to share. Please, let's go to the next slide. And I would just like to explain a little bit of the cooperation genesis in the Danube River Basin. And I think a genesis, how cooperation actually evolves and develops, is quite critical on the effectiveness and quality of the management in a basin. And there I would like to flag when the Iron Curtain fell down between Western and Eastern Europe. That really played quite a big role, because organizations like the ICPDR became a kind of clue, the Danube connector between those countries, the Eastern and Southern European countries, to link to Europe as quickly as possible. So that was for sure something that developed a trust and a will for cooperation in the Danube River Basin. And in follow-up, the 14 contracting countries of the ICPDR signed the Danube River Protection Convention, which is the legal frame that we are cooperating within. And under this convention, expert groups were established. And I will, in a few moments, explain those expert groups, which are actually the linkage to our contracting parties and to our member states, very important. I also would like to flag the EU Directives Implementation, which started in the year 2000. So the implementation of the Water Framework Directive, and then in follow-up of the EU Floods Directive. Why do I mention this here? I'm mentioning it because with those directives, all experts and also the leaders in the contracting parties started to speak the same language across the basin. I'm speaking about the technical language, I'm speaking about an economic language, but also an ecological language. It was really unified. And these are really those basic elements for cooperation, trust, will, and ownership in the Danube River Basin. And of course, this is backed up with, I think, very effective cooperation mechanism that ensures our joint management and also reaching out to the wider public and to stakeholders. If we can please go to the next slide. You can see here our contracting parties in the Danube River Basin. So 9 EU member states and 5 non-EU member states. So that's quite a variation because the EU member states have to implement the water legislation of the European Union, and the non-EU member states, of course, don't have to do that. So although we have the Danube River Protection Convention, this could pose a certain challenge. However, the non-EU member states are committed to also follow the EU directive implementation as far as it's possible. And it's all about learning from each other again, and therefore the actually differing legal basis brought the countries in their cooperation closer together. So this is a challenge, turns into further commitment. Next slide, please. And that's almost my last slide here. This is the mechanism we are cooperating with. Of course, we have the delegations on top of the mechanisms and the permanent secretariat, where I'm sitting as well with the entire team in Vienna. And then you can see we have 8 expert groups and 4 task groups. And these are really the linkages. So each of the contracting parties nominates national experts, representatives into those groups where technical topics are being discussed, conclusions are being met, and these are taken to our plenary meetings where actually decisions are met. So the exchange of all 14 countries plus the European Union in each of these groups really is the clue of the ICPDR, discussing joint topics and finding not pollutions, but solutions. And there's, for example, a river basin management expert group, monitoring and assessment, pressures and measures, and so on and so on. And if we can go to the last slide, please, because this is also something that makes effectiveness in management of river basin organization, is to actually identify and tackle joint challenges and activities. And of course, the information sharing data to come to joint conclusions across the entire basin. And you see on the right side as well, I don't want to neglect that. Of course, the stakeholder involvement and public participation is seen as essential in the ICPDR to really get the countries together. I hand over to you again, Susana, and I hope I was able to provide a short insight.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Birgit. Very interesting, especially I think the expert groups and how the countries come together with their specific technical experts under the different topics, and therefore can really speak to each other. And as you say, can speak the same technical language. Seems to me really, really important. And I hope we'll get back to that later in the discussion. But let's look first at the third dimension. But before we get to you, Santi, let me just mention to everyone that you can still post your questions in the Menti. So if there's anything that's unclear to you, anything that you would want to know, or anything that you're wondering, please don't forget to share these questions in the Menti. But with that, let's get to the third element, money. Money, of course, always matters for all these activities, and can at the same time also be a challenge. And I think the Mekong River Commission has seen its challenges when it comes to funding, but has also found a very interesting and successful, I would say, way to deal with it. And we'll have Santi sharing these experiences with us. Santi is, as I mentioned earlier, the Chief Strategy and Partnership Officer with the MRC. He's been with MRC for quite a long time in various functions, monitoring the work that's been happening at the MRC, being involved in the MRC strategic plans, but also has an experience more broadly in the region and is really an organizational expert. So here we're not talking to a water engineer, but someone actually coming from a different background and contributing his knowledge to basin management. And I also, although I've known Santi for a long time, I actually also didn't know that Santi is a great mobile app programmer and has developed, among other things, the first mobile app to monitor hydropower dams in Laos. That's really great, Santi. I'll make sure to check that out after today's session. But let's get back to funding and to money. Santi, can you share some of the MRC's experience with us when it comes to funding and ensuring the financial sustainability for cooperation?
Thank you, Susana. You flattered me a lot. I'm just an ordinary guy, but I'm happy to share with you in the context of MRC and what MRC is undergoing about funding. Next slide, please. Yep. So I think like every organization in the basin, you go to an evolution. Or a human life cycle, starting from childhood, to adolescent, to adulthood, and then to senior citizen. Just like an organization, it goes through a certain lifespan, and we go through certain phases in life. And I think right now MRC is facing a midlife crisis. We're going through challenges of finding our identity. What is our competitive advantage? In order for us to be self-financed. So we went, since 1995, we were project-based. We have 100 staff. And then in 2000, 2010, we were program-based. And this was really the heyday of MRC. Heyday, I mean that, we had a lot of funding. We had a lot of staff. We have 120 million, funding. We have 12 projects. We have nearly over, nearly 200, plus staff in the organization. And these were, we were like compared to a really fat kid. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of events. We had a lot to do. We have a lot of budget. And then back in 2010, when the 4 prime minister meets, and this is where the leaders of all the 4 countries decided to say, okay, I think it's time MRC will undergo a process of being self-financed. And this is where they agree on the roadmap at the high level political level, that from 2010 to 2030, we will phase out donor funding, no more development partner funding, and be fully member states contribution. And this was very breakthrough because we plummet, from 120 million and 200 staff to only around 64 and only around 65 million, funding for 5 years. So there was a drastic change. And this is where the organization is going through a process of, in order for if our resources were to be very limited, to be self-financed, we need to start identifying what are the focus area of being competitive advantage of the organization in order for it to strive and survive in the future. Next slide, please, Tobias. Yes, so if you plotted that information in the graph, as you can see that, the green bar, the green line is the staffing. It has reduced over time. And then we're aiming to only around 40 staff in order to sustain financially from the member states contribution. And if you look at the red line, this is where the development partner contribution is declining over time until it reaches 0 in 2030. And if you look at the blue line, this is where the member states are increasing over time. So these 3 dimensions are overlaying and cross-cutting in order for the organization to go through an evolution and identify how we can survive and what are our competitive advantage in the future if we were to sustain financially the organization. Next slide, please. So before we get there, one of the story that I would like to tell is that, we tried various ways of how countries would contribute, to an RBO. We tried with catchment area. If you can see the first row of the table, which country has the largest catchment area will have to pay more. Now, we also tried average flow. Which country has the highest average flow has to pay more, and which one has the least pay less. Which one has the most irrigated area, in terms of million of hectare, we have to pay more. Which country has the highest population, we have to pay more. Which country has a high per capita GDP income has to pay more. So we tried all those formula, but it didn't work, and you know what really worked? Can you go to the next slide? Yes, so what really worked is that, all the scientific formula, all those technical information, it boils down to a very simple fact of just, Mekong spirit. It boils down to the simple fact of understanding, of country, really understanding that, Vietnam and Thailand has higher income per capita and have higher economic wealth. So they pay more, and then Laos and Cambodia would pay less, and then eventually they would merge into an equal contribution by 2030. Next slide, please. And what's very important is that if you want to be self-financed, what you have to put in place is value for money assessment tools. This is very critical in an organization where you're reforming your financial from a program funding to basket funding and later on to self-financing. So we put in place a cost and benefit analysis tools to help monitor some of this value for money. Next slide, please. Even though we have successfully agreed on the roadmap to be self-financed, there are some limitations in terms of delay in transfer. Although never missed, but still delayed. We have to also support some political goodwill to reach consensus in the contribution amount. We also have to take into account some of the sudden and development partners withdrawal of certain funding. Also, recruitment could be a challenge. Strengthening the coordination and also momentum of the reform needs to be kept. Next slide, please. So what is the takeaway point? So 4 takeaway point for the audience is we need to gain political will using the Mekong spirit. I think that worked very well. Also, we encourage national ownership very much to sustain. We also exercise water diplomacy in reaching member countries' consensus. And also we try to make a difference in managing trade-off in terms of economic benefits and also reducing transparent impact. Thank you, Susana. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Santi. That was really interesting, and I think it became clear that basin management and ensuring that RBOs are effective in managing basins is not only about water, but it's also a lot about management. It's a lot about making sure that financial management is in place and other things, but also, and I like how you highlighted the Mekong spirit here, is also very much related to countries being committed to cooperation. And I think that's something that's really important because you said the member states always pay in the MRC. And I think that's something that we do not see in all of the basins and basin organizations around the world. In fact, there are basin organizations, I'm not going to name any names here, but there are basin organizations where member states have not paid at all in the 10, 15 years of the existence of that organization. So I think having countries committed to your RBO and regularly paying is a really great sign of how the countries actually value the organization that is in place, which in turn is also a sign that you're doing work that's being appreciated by the countries, right? Otherwise they wouldn't pay. So thanks a lot for that, Santi. I've been asked to now moderate the questions. That's why I'm looking down. I'm looking at my phone where I have the questions that came in through the Menti. We have a lot of questions that came in. It's going to be a challenge to get to all of them. What I will do is I will not focus on the questions that were specifically targeted on one of the basins and one of the topics, such as funding in the Mekong, but I will rather look at the ones that are a bit more general because the specific ones you can take with you in the breakout groups that we'll have later. So there'll be a breakout group focusing on member country linkages and Danube. There'll be one focused on funding and the MRC and one on basin management and the Orange Basin. So keep these questions with you for then. I'll focus on some that could be relevant for all. And one that came up was stakeholder engagement. Maybe I can turn that one to you, Birgit, first. The question was, what lessons can be learned from stakeholder engagement and how is that useful for a basin organization to bring in different stakeholders? I'm thinking here also way beyond the member states, NGOs and so on. How can that help with effective basin management?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think management in a river basin does actually not exist if stakeholders are not being involved. So I would like to relate first to the different sectors. So, for example, dealing with hydropower, there is no way to have a discussion without involving the hydropower sector. The same is valid for agriculture and all other users to get like balanced discussions and, of course, most importantly, to get balanced solutions so that we can find solutions that are looking at economic development, but of course, equally taking into account environmental measures that are needed. And of course, also making the wider public, including children, of course, aware of the value of functioning rivers, of water resources that actually have an environmental value is very critical, as the involvement of NGOs to get their views as well on the different challenges.
Thanks, Birgit. Very, very interesting indeed. And please, if you want to hear more what the ICPDR does, join the breakout group with Birgit in a little bit. I'll get to another question that had been asked on Menti, and that could be a question to all of you, but I'll target you first, Lenka. The question is, what role can basin organizations play in preventing or managing conflict? And I'm thinking, for example, of the situation that we saw in your region in the 2015, around 2015 years, where there was a major drought in the basin, and in fact, all the countries were concerned about getting their share of water, but this has not, as many might have expected, has not led to conflict, but has actually led to an intensified cooperation between the states. What did Orascom do?
Yes, and I think you already touched on it somehow earlier on when you were speaking about how the basin management plan in this particular case of ours has to be very much related to the country priorities and country plans, because when all the studies have been conducted related to climate change and the focus were indicating that we're going to have below average as well as drought conditions, below average rain and drought conditions, then it became very critical to revisit some of the plans that the countries were prioritizing. And this is where projects such as the Lesotho-Botswana Water Transfer Project became a high priority, as well as the one that I mentioned between Namibia and South Africa. But this project then became elevated in terms of how they need to be implemented. And Orascom was given well, a role, albeit maybe not that major, in terms of project preparation and getting these projects through feasibility studies and so on. But some of the other maybe less prominent work that was conducted to ensure that there is continuing deep cooperation among the states is the work that is related to the joint field excursions that we undertake. Yes, we do field excursions related to pollution and water quality, but there is also field excursions related to the broader water resources issues, how the water is being harvested by the different member states. And I think through appreciation of some of these realities on the ground, you end up having less possibilities of conflicts, at least in our river basin. Thank you very much.
Thanks. That's really interesting indeed, and it very much links to countries being committed to cooperate, which is a perfect segue into the next question that I have for Santi, actually, summarizing a number of questions that came out of the Menti. So the MRC is funded by its member states. So member states contribute financially. But how do you make sure that they see the value for money of what the MRC is doing? Or what would you do if they didn't see it? How can you convince them that they have to contribute and engage financially, but also more broadly?
Thank you. Thank you, Susana. I think MRC is lucky that we don't face that issues that member states are not contributing to the MRC. But I think if they were to if they did not contribute, what would need to be in place? I think I would say three things we need to put in place. I think one is it's very important is you need to have a common transboundary issue that identified, and what are some of these transboundary issues or impact will justify the need for an RBO. I think the second part is if there's a regional data sharing in terms of notification mechanism, like the release of hydropower in one country cause an impact to reverse flow in another country, there's a need to have a regional data center. And then member states will pay for this service, to have a regional body of data center to coordinate certain impact of transboundary. I think the third part is monitoring the health of the basin. What is currently the health status of the Mekong Basin right now? So MRC is working on monitoring all this health status of the basin in terms of raising awareness on what are the urgency actions that are needed in terms of relating to sediment, wetland, fishery habitats, navigation, so that these monitoring the health status will reach out to policymakers and leadership. And these are the kind of things that people will pay, the member states will pay for these kind of services in the future. And if you can maintain these three things, I think you can, the political will to contribute will be sustained.
Thanks, Santi. I have another question that I think I'll ask you, Birgit, although it would generally apply to all the basins. Someone in the Menti question part is wondering how you share information between the countries. Here, the question is specifically about water quality, but I think it relates to any information that is being shared in the basin. And how do you make member states share that with you and with all the other member states? I think you're still muted, Birgit.
Yes, you're right. Thanks for the question. And I actually would like to mention here that this was one of the first activities within the ICPDR to establish a transnational monitoring network in order to share data that's transparent. And of course, this is ongoing until today. And we do have a very nice database within the ICPDR. On one hand, this is Danube GIS for also producing maps. And then our database Danube, where actually in Danube GIS, the countries are uploading the data themselves in order to be used for the Danube River Basin Management Plan and the Flood Risk Management Plan. And of course, there's access to the data for the countries, but also from the public. So I can also provide those links if anyone is interested to look at it. But that's the way, in a very short summary, how we are sharing the data.
Thanks. Yeah, it would be great if you could just paste the links in the chat. I can imagine that with 14 member states, not always easy, but I think that's why it's a very interesting example for other basins as well. Let me take maybe two more questions from the Menti, one for each, one for you, Santi, one for you, Lenka. Lenka, starting with you. There's a question that I think could also be relevant for all basins, but I'll ask it to you. What's the role of third parties such as donors or development partners in cooperation in the Orange River Basin? Have they played a role? Have they been useful in any way?
Yes, and the partnerships that we have with development cooperation or donors, they can be called from time to time, has been both in terms of the technical knowledge and therefore transfer of knowledge, and also in terms of the financing of some of the programs that we do. I think it could be that is knowledge out there that the Orange Simcoe River Basin Secretariat is very, very small, and one can use the word affordability. I know our colleague from the Mekong has elaborated very well on that. But the development cooperation partners really help to speed up the implementation of the priorities of the river basin. I think that's the simplest explanation that one can give. and also in bringing some of the emerging issues that are very important in terms of water resources management. Issues such as adaptation and addressing or mainstreaming adaptation to climate change, mainstreaming gender, and those kinds of topics that we may not have been able to handle well by ourselves. Maybe I stop there for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Untitled Lenka. Santi, I've left the last, but also the most challenging question for you. Someone is asking how you deal with what the person asking the question calls a hydrohegemon. We can also just call it a powerful state. How do you deal with them? And I guess the Mekong is an interesting example, with China not being a part of the MRC, but the MRC actually, in spite of China's often observed reluctance to engage in transboundary cooperation, the MRC has been quite successful in getting China on board, working with China, engaging with China increasingly. What's happening there right now? Where have you come from, and how are you cooperating with China now?
Yes, thank you, Susana. Yes, that's the very one of the hot questions that I get all the time in most of the forum. So China and Myanmar both are our dialogue partners. So it's a permanent mechanism where we meet them on a yearly basis to update the work of progress, and then to have any open discussion on any area of work for the MRC. But what we do that I think really bring a lot of cooperation with China is we have this joint effort or joint study, or we conduct joint research or joint data collection. And I think it builds mutual relationship and mutual benefits, especially you want to cooperate with China. So we have this joint study where it talks about the hydrological change. When during the extreme climate, there's a lot of hydrological change of the water flow. It could be very low on today, and then the next day it could be very high. There's a lot of fluctuation in the flow regime. So in relating to also the water infrastructure that's in place. So we're doing a joint study to do some data collection and also data sharing. What are some impact of this water infrastructure when it comes to this change in water levels of flow regime. So that's one area. The other area is we have joint information sharing platform. So this is another area of how China used to share certain period of data, but now they share both flood and dry season on Jinghong Dam as well. So these are some area that we involve in both joint study, dialogue partners meeting, also data sharing. So these are some various mechanisms that we put in place, and it will be a catalyst. The outcome of the joint study will be a catalyst for more joint efforts of other areas as well.
Thanks, Santi. That's really interesting, and also leads quite nicely into my difficult task now to summarize what we discussed so far before we move into the breakout groups. And I think the process of the MRC engaging with China, from no engagement in the beginning to quite an elaborate cooperation now, although China isn't a member, I think this progress, which is not linear but with ups and downs, is I think something that we can say for basin organizations generally. I think there'll never be the perfect basin organization, and there'll never be the perfect process from setting up a basin organization and that organization functioning perfectly from the beginning on. There'll always be ups and downs, but I think what's important is for me two things. One is that starting small in terms of building institutionalized cooperation is always better than not starting. So as small as the cooperation might look in the beginning, and as little exchange as there might be between the countries, that's always still better than not engaging with neighboring countries over their shared water resources. And the other thing I think is also, and that relates very much to what I asked you all in the very beginning, what does effectiveness mean for you? It's very much related to how we define effectiveness. And I think not only in basin management, just as human beings, we always tend to think about effective as in the perfect, right? We want the perfect basin organization. We want the river to be perfectly clean, the basin organization to be perfectly financially self-sustainable with the greatest staff it can get and the perfect work that it's doing. But if we're honest, shouldn't we rather be focusing at what would be counterfactual if there was no cooperation, if there was no basin organization, and see how far we've actually come in many basins around the world at different stages, obviously, but how far we've really come in ensuring that countries at least talk to each other, exchange data, monitor basins together, develop joint projects, as small as they might be. And isn't that so much better already than not cooperating at all, or even, as we see, luckily in very few only, but as we see in some basins around the world, where there's still conflict, sometimes even including violence over shared water resources. I think that's, for me, really the key message and really the plea for, no matter how much basin organizations are sometimes being criticized for how much they've made a difference in the different basins that they work in. And I think what we also discussed is how they can, or what they actually need in order to make such a difference. And here I think the inputs we got from Birgit, Lenka, and Santi really showed what matters. It's being able to manage a basin, being able to connect to member states, and being able to have the funding to do all that available. That's really crucial. I'm very happy that we can continue discussing this in more detail, whether you're interested in funding, member state linkages, or basin management in the working groups or in the breakout groups. But that's not my area of expertise. I'll actually hand over to Yumiko to explain to us what we have to do in order to find ourselves in the breakout group that we end up with. Yumiko, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Susana, for this really great wrap up and 3 speakers, really a diverse examples of different basins. And I think we all learned a lot already. So now this is an opportunity for you to directly speak to the speakers of your choice. So we are going to have 3 breakout rooms that you can go and choose. The first room will be Lenka, who would like to hear more about Orasecom experience, and Susana will be facilitating that room. The second room will be Birgit. So if you want to know more ICPDR and member state relations and so on, please come to the room 2 that I'll be facilitating. And then room 3 will be with Santi from MRC. So if you want to know more about finance or any other MECON related strategies, please join the group, and Tobias will be facilitating. At the bottom of your screen, you will now see a dots where you can actually choose the breakout rooms. So please, soon, I think in a minute, our tech host will be opening the breakout rooms. Once it's open, yes, now it's open, you can choose which room to go to. And if you don't know how to go to that room, just in the chat, type in the number of the room. You can want to go 1 or 2 or 3. And our tech host will send you there. So we'll have about next 18 minutes or so in the breakout and before you come into the plenary. So enjoy. I hope you will have a great discussion. And I'm going to jump to my breakout rooms. And I hope you will all be able to select your own. Okay, so Mario, if you can facilitate if anyone's having a problem. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I really hope that you had a good discussion. My group was very, very active. There was no time for the speaker to take any pause, but I think it was a very interesting conversation. So I would like to perhaps thank all the panelists at this stage. And if you have any reflection, both the panelists and also the participants, we would like to invite all of you to join this Transboundary Water Knowledge Exchange Hub on the GWP IWM toolbox. If the tech host could please share the slide on this post-event discussion. Yes, so in the beginning, I will introduce you to this post-event discussion, where you can actually post your reflections, further questions, anything related to this topic. Please come to this site. You do need to log in to the GWP Toolbox's account. You need to create the account, but once you create the account, you can join the community and they start posting. So please do feel free to come and share your thoughts. We really look forward to welcoming you to this space. Thank you very much. And thank you so much to all the speakers for very active participation. Then I would like to announce the next event. So the next event of this season 3 and the last event of this year, it will be on the 2nd of November. This will be together with the Oregon State University, using the data in transboundary water management and negotiations. The registration is open now. I think my colleague has already typed in to the chat how you can actually register. So please join us. We are also really looking forward to your participation in this next event. The next slide, please. Yes, I would also like to really encourage you to sign up to the MOOC. Today's event focused on the institution that's related to Module 4. I'm also happy to mention to you that all of the 3 cases, ICPDR, MRC, or SECOM cases, it's not the same talk, but these institutions are all part of this MOOC. It's all designed so there will be a lecture, actually on institutions. Susana is giving a lecture, and then there are case studies associated with it. So please join the MOOC and also take a look at different case studies. I really hope that you will learn from many other cases. So with this, I would like to thank everyone for joining, and finally invite all of you to open your camera, because it's a tradition that we always take this group photo at the end to see. So we like to see all of your faces, and we might be using it for some promotional materials. So if you don't want your face to be there, you don't need to open your camera, but we love to see you. So please open the camera while our tech host is going to take the photo. So maybe you can give a big smile and then maybe wave to each other in this photo. Mario, tell us when we can stop waving.
We are ready, Yumiko. Thanks.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining this 1.5 hour. It was very full event, and I think we all learned a lot. I would like to thank again Susana for really bringing everyone together, the great speakers, and to really organizing this session together with us. And I would really like to also thank Birgit, Santi, and Lenka for really great intervention and taking your busy time out of your work to join us today. Thank you very much, and we see you again next time and on the Transboundary Water Knowledge Hub. Thank you. Bye.